Hi, welcome everybody. Today we're here to discuss many things, security, identity, and some challenges that we see in the industry. This is the first in an exciting series that we've got from Armadillo, and it's the Security Sessions RSA edition today. I'm delighted to have three guests with me. We've been talking about various different things off camera, and I think the conversation is going to continue. So Dan, Ingo, Tyler, fantastic to have you here today. Pivot to you first, Dan, bit of an introduction.
Hello, my name's Daniel Oxley. I'm Chief Technology Officer at Armadillo.
Fantastic. Ingo, please.
And my name is Ingo Schubert. I'm Field CTO at RSA.
And I'm Tyler Oliver. I'm CEO of Huntbase.
Awesome. So when we were thinking about this today, I know we were saying, okay, let's think of some things in the industry that lots of people have an opinion on, but maybe that opinion's a little bit of rhetoric. Maybe there's a few things that aren't quite the way that they are, So I want to start with a few of those. Obviously, RSA, we have with us today. Obviously, identity, passwordless, zero trust, many different things that I want to talk about. So let's start with the concept of zero trust, because I know off camera we were having a bit of a laugh about this. So start with you, Ingo, if I can. What does it mean to you? Is it technology? Is it a process? Talk to me.
It's definitely technology, but also process architecture. So it actually spans a whole lot of things, right? If you boil it down to what it means for identity, there's a lot of things in there as well.
Yeah.
Definitely strong authentication is a huge part of that. But also things like least privilege. Yeah. So it's not just like, can somebody get in? But once you're in, what can you do? And the concept of least privilege is that everybody has only as many entitlements as he or she needs to do the job, right? Not more, right? Yeah. It's not really like multi-factor authentication. It's not really a brand new concept, but zero trust is like a collection of multiple of those technical controls, policies, and procedures, all wrapped into one nice buzzword.
See, I love that. I thought, obviously working for RSA, I thought maybe we would get a very kind of product answer to that. So thinking a bit more holistically, definitely, that's a good tone for this recording. But Dan, what are your clients saying? Are you being asked for kind of zero trust solutions? Are people
absolutely,
thinking about it in terms of?
So, zero trust is a little bit of a brand name now. It's almost it's thrown around a lot. A lot of people don't really think about what it means. The axiom of never trust, always verify is absolutely true. And when we talk about zero trust with customers, it could be network segmentation, micro segmentation. It could be conditional access. There's a whole plethora of technologies which are available that fall under the umbrella. So actually, often when I talk to a customer and the topic comes up, I want to dig into it. So, what do you interpret zero trust as? What is it you're trying to achieve? And then that could take you down a road of network equipment or endpoint management or anything else. It's become one of these monikers that covers a huge range of things, really.
Yeah, got it. So are you having customers coming and specifically saying, we want a zero trust solution, or they're coming to you?
Exactly that. Absolutely, exactly that. We need zero trust. And that might have come from DORA regulation or PCI or GDPR or one of the other many ones which are out there, but they don't necessarily understand what they want. It's come down from the board. What are we doing for our zero trust plan? And then that's where if we for the customers where we have a relationship as it's a bit of a cliche, trusted advisor sort of approach. But if I can sit there with a customer and have that conversation, sort of turn it around. What is it that you want to achieve?
So I was leading the witness a little bit there. I was wondering if it was things like COVID or organisations with data centres that are looking to decommission. Pivot to Tyler, actually, because I know he's got opinions on kind of most things. Do you think approaching things by saying terms like zero trust is getting us anywhere? What's your take?
Yeah, I think so. If you look over the last 15 years, you used to run into organizations quite regularly where everyone was domain admin, everyone had full access to everything, and the migration has always been, hey, moving to a zero trust model, and I really like the idea of kind of bringing in almost a limited access approach, so like a just-in-time access, and as organizations start to adopt that, it becomes like everyone in the organization you don't trust until they absolutely need access to something, and I find that really helpful in kind of securing their estates from the threats that I've kind of seen in the wild. So.
Okay, man, cool. In my view, if anyone cares, I think it's super confusing as well, because trust
very
is
much
just,
so.
do you know what I mean? Trust is intrinsic. in any organization, right? And I think there's been lots of stuff published online. I don't know if we're doing show notes and stuff, but we can find some around. There has to be like trust. There has to be psychological safety from like a people perspective in organizations. So personally, I just find the term zero trust, like us as security professionals, we kind of get it. We get the components. Ingo, you decomposed it very well there. Tyler, as well done. But yeah, there's always going to be some level of trust, I think. So
I think even the three of us had very different kind of definitions of zero trust as well, and the market does as well. Yeah. It's really tough for people to be like, hey, what do I need? Why do I need this?
100%.
Sure.
And some of the things, the technology out there, you think about things like IGA, where you can have just-in-time provisioning. It allows you to not trust your users until the absolute last mile, and then give them the rights, but then just take it away afterwards.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think we're starting to see vendors out there now moving away from everything being... I remember, funnily enough, the RSA conference, like 2 years ago, because obviously last year it was AI for everything, which we'll come on to that. But, you know, zero trust, SASE-based XYZ, like I feel we are now moving it away to the principles and stuff. So,
I mean, it's also, you have to realize that, you know, zero trust is the point is that you have no trust in the beginning of some starting point. Yeah, so there could be somebody logging into a system, somebody showing up for the first day, at work, and then you build that trust. So this is where the zero comes from. And I mean, many of the technologies that are being used now basically mushed in together into the zero trust, architecture or framework. It's nothing really revolutionary new, strong authentication, least privilege. I mean, those are ages old, but you know what? If it needs like a buzzword as zero trust for customers to actually do the right thing, because strong authentication, least privilege, network access control, you just do that because that's the right thing to do. If it needs a buzzword to get them do that, I'm all for it.
Yeah, we'll have like listeners and viewers screaming about like the Jericho forum and like the origins of zero trust and stuff. But no, good guys. This was a great start, given that we've got kind of like in my head anyway 6 or 7 of these different things to talk about. I'm going to stick with you, Ingo, then, because you talked about there about like authentication.
Right.
So given you work for RSA and we're going down that kind of conversation around authentication, like passwordless. Right. So before I pivot on that, like I find that term confusing. Like, I mean, if I were to explain it, Dan, we had a chat last week about this. If I were to try and explain what that means, it's a paradox because it's the most simple, but also it's so like intrinsically complicated as well. So and this is a bit product-y, but I feel it's important. Like, how is RSA approaching passwordless? Because there's so many ways that you could tackle it.
Yeah. So I think first of all, if you'd be a customer and say, I want passwordless. The first thing I would say is like, okay, that will be a long journey, right? Okay. It's not a product that you install and then pixie dust and you passwordless. It doesn't work that way, right? Yeah. Going passwordless is, at the end, the goal should be, there won't be any passwords from start to finish. So users won't even have a single password anymore, right? But to get there is depending on how, historic infrastructure you may have or so, it might be like a long road, right? Yeah. But even if on that way to that target, you reduce the amount of passwords and the amount of times you actually have to use a password, even that is a win, right? Yeah. So going passwordless, first of all, is a journey, really. And depending on the company, it could be a long journey.
Yeah.
That should be fair, right? It's kind of strange for many to grasp the passwordless future or passwordless concept because passwords are everywhere, right? So for many, it's like, I use a password to, register for my MFA token, whatever that might be. Yeah, but in a passwordless scenario, that doesn't work anymore, right? You don't have a password to do that, right? You maybe have a registration code or something like that. What we do, and there are many other ways. There are many ways to do that. But if you are so used to passwords, also in your private life, think that there won't be any passwords anymore is kind of hard. I agree.
I'm going to come back to you on the less side of it. Like if you're not having passwords, what do you actually have? But let's come back to that, Dan. I wanted to talk to you about like implementation. Like I quizzed you before and said, hey, are people asking for zero trust solutions? Like, are you getting customers coming to you asking for passwordless as a technology? Like, hey, Dan, we need this? Or
so I've never had a customer come to us and ask for it. So
it's amazing to me.
But it's as you mentioned, right? It's the concept, and Ingo was saying it's a journey. I mean, Microsoft released it for their public services a year or two ago. And I adopted it immediately. It's fantastic. Okay, but you imagine trying to implement that into a business where you've got people going passwordless, and they might have tokens or iShield devices or something else which allows them to authenticate themselves. Then they forget the device. And then how do you get around it? And then you need all your systems to support passwordless. And so now you might need a PAM solution which allows you to authenticate, and an IDP and who knows what else. And you're balancing up security versus usability. And at some point, the scales are not going to tip in your favour of security.
It's interesting because I mean, this is probably not why I'm sitting here on the couch, but having worked in the product space for a while, the idea of passwordless wasn't necessarily a conversation that came up because of security. Because like if there's authentication at that stage, it ticked the box like, okay, we've at least put a layer in front of it. But passwordless came up more often on how do we simplify the user experience for the non-technical user? How can we remove that friction of remembering a password? And so maybe the individuals that are dealing with, hey, I need passwordless implemented in my organization is more app developers, more products actually being delivered. Because, sure, I can remember a password. I use a password manager or whatever, but I'd much rather have the majority of my employees not having to worry about a password situation at all. And that's where that would likely have to be embedded in my application or my end user's application.
But you can mostly get there through an identity provider. So you log onto your computer once, and then when you open your browser session, as long as all your services support it,
there you go.
You're single sign-on.
I was going to say, there you go. Especially like, legacy applications. If you have an old mainframe tucked away that, since the 70s haven't touched that thing. Does that do anything with passwordless? You probably run into some issues, especially with legacy applications. So, and to get them into this passwordless world, you might think like, this might be the one thing where you go like, I have to build a web front end for this, or finally, upgrade that to a new version or whatever. Because, in many cases, there will be one or two applications that just, resist being passwordless. But even if that might be okay, because it might be a bunch of applications that are used by only a limited set of users, and the vast majority of the users can actually do passwordless, right? So it's this black and white that you should avoid. Like, we never will be 100% passwordless. It's like, that doesn't really matter. As long as the majority of the users, maybe the high-risk users, as long as they are passwordless, that will be a huge win, because passwords are just the worst of all options, right? So anything you do better than passwords is a win.
Absolutely agree. I agree with that completely. I just feel it's another one of those things that feels paradoxical, because to anybody saying, we'll get rid of all of your passwords, they'll be like, fantastic. And I think to your point, again, it was another leading question. The reason I was saying, hey, like, have you had any customers ask for it? It's because I'm always finding at the moment there's always the but. So it's great, and yes, we can eradicate all your passwords. Oh, unless you have a mainframe, or unless you have this particular application that doesn't have a way of kind of integrating and stuff. But I do feel it's the right direction.
But I mean, just to counter Tyler's point about it's for usability, it's all, from my perspective, I'm going to touch the microphone. From my perspective, it's also security, because if the user doesn't have the credentials, then there's nothing to leak in that respect.
Well, would you not say that, again, like your point around availability is a core tenet of security, and if your implementation of passwordless requires physical devices that aren't there, you're not affecting it that way.
I can jump in and play the buzzword bingo game here and say, it's always the defensive depth strategy of like, all right, some things can be passwordless, some things can be legacy with not, with traditional authentication. I don't think that is a bad thing necessarily. If you remove friction at your end users or your maybe higher risk users with passwordless, but keep your core old school, legacy tech secure in a different way, that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, and it's a bit of a carrot and stick to move that legacy tech to something more contemporary so that you can then leverage better security, right?
And I think to your point, well, it is, but like to your point, coming back to like if you lose your hardware to authenticate, it's like, there should be policies and procedures to handle that, right? And to be honest, like, having a pure hardware authenticator, that might only apply to a certain, kind of number of users that you have. Others are fine with a smartphone, for example. Yeah. Or you have multiple ways to authenticate. Maybe you have, a FIDO passkey compliant USB stick and your mobile phone, right? So it's also something where, that can be handled. This is nothing that's unsolvable.
You stolen my next question. There we go. I was going to ask. No, it's great.
Sorry.
Thank you. Sit here. Wonderful.
It's my German
I was going to ask how RSA is approaching that. Like, do you know what I mean? When you think about kind of product strategy, and obviously we know this principle of, we want passwordless, but thinking about enumerating those requirements and stuff. So you would very much say this needs to be a granular, flexible, multi-factor. We'll come on to multi-factor in a second, but different form factors to do this, yeah?
Oh, absolutely. There's no one size fits all there. Previously, years and years back, if you had like an OTP generator, that was fine because that needed for the users that were remote and had to dial in on via VPN or like access webmail or whatever. Yeah. Nowadays, like everybody really needs MFA because everybody is using much more IT infrastructure either on premise or in the cloud. So the amount of users, even like the percentage of users in your company that really require MFA is way bigger than it was like a couple of years back. But that also means that those type of users, they have different requirements and capabilities. Maybe some actually do have a smartphone they can use for authentications. Others do not. Maybe others, they cannot take the smartphones to their working place for whatever reason, right? Security reasons or restrictions in electronic emissions or whatever. It doesn't matter. So you need to have different types of authentication methods that are adequately secure. For each type of user. And there might be users that can have multiple methods as well. And that all needs to be being handled in the back end, all from assigning those authenticators and especially important recovery. Like, I lost my authenticator. Stuff like that needs to be there, both in the policies and workflows, as well as the technology that's being used.
That makes sense. Like, I do feel on this and on the previous point, there is just so much of this is process, right?
Oh, yes.
And I know that's a really kind of trite potentially thing to say, but you've said there about different personas, and previously we talked about like role-based access control. Like, I suppose it's to you there. Like, are you helping your clients through doing that? Because in my kind of experience, I found that's the difficult piece. If you're deploying GPOs or you're looking at passwordless or you're looking at zero trust, you don't know what users are doing. Like, so how are you doing that? I assume you are. Like, are you doing that education?
Look, absolutely. So every single service and product and conversation that we have with our customers, RBAC comes up.
Okay.
Segregation of duty, responsibilities, as well as the event tracking, and it's a very broad conversation. But nowadays, if the products aren't supporting it, then they kind of fall by the wayside very quickly. It's I think businesses have realised the importance of really breaking it down in a very granular way because they want a hugely joined up story. They want a global solution across all of their departments, but they don't want the German, because they say German's Workers' Council, you can't have non-locals looking at that data and vice versa. And so on.
True. I just find the boring stuff, if we're going to call it that, the process side of things just never gets done. And it's why I was asking around, are people specifically asking for zero trust? Are they asking for passwordless?
It's one of the most important things. You look at some of the regulations at the moment that financial sector are having to deal with, manufacturing as well, critical national infrastructure. Those process parts potentially are the difference between a breach or not a breach if we're going to be sort of extreme.
You're right. You've teed me up perfectly. I was going to ask Tyler.
It was a leading question.
Brilliant stuff. Yeah, brilliant. Tyler, around kind of like the breach side of things, like some of these things that we're talking about today, you've worked on many different kind of investigations and things we won't go into, but like some of these principles, like how are you then educating clients as to how these things could have been stopped? Because that's why we're doing all of these things. We're buying all of these technologies to stop breaches, right? Broadly, that's probably another topic. But
I think it's easy to kind of educate after the fact. Like, okay, hey, you've just gone through this. We're having to go through complete credential resets across the environment, or we're having to go through deploying, say, passwordless because of a breach that occurred. That's like the quick and easy way to educate. But it's also walking people through why the breach, like where was the breaking point. So, hey, business email compromise led to, follow-on credential loss, which led to that pivot, lateral movement, through the network to a critical system, which led to data loss. if you had gone through and looked at it more from a, going back to the kind of siloed user approach or siloed access approach, could that user have had a more tighter permissions, a different authentication mechanism in order to access that critical system they needed? That starts to tell a story of like, actually, hey, maybe we should implement this in a slightly different way. Okay. But again, that's after the fact. And so then it's, from my perspective, it's me just educating other people on, hey, this is what's happened before. Are you open to the idea of like reevaluating your authentication approach? Are you open to kind of not just saying, hey, everyone gets a token, everyone in the organization authenticates the same way, but actually we look at it in slightly different ways, as you were saying.
Yeah, that makes sense. And to either of you, so to Inga or Dan, like, are you using, or are your clients using sort of breaches in the industry in their vertical as like catalysts for their security program? Because people always tell me they are, but are you seeing that out there? Oh, we work in finance, this finance org was popped.
Right.
You can go first.
Okay. No names. I'm not saying yes, this client.
Before you jump in, sorry, I was just going to say, the one problem I find is there's not enough released about the authentication failures of those breaches.
Right.
And we can go wider than all.
So the thing is that, not many countries have, where you actually have to publish a breach. Yeah. So there are some laws and regulations in the EU. I know, sensitive subject here, but but if you look at some of the breaches that were done, like the MGM, like the casino hacks, for example, MFA, like strong authentication, was not breached there or was not hacked. What did they do? They went around it by misusing policies and procedures and workflows, right? So, and I think this is often where customers have like a bit of a wake-up call, and I always tell them, like, if you do one thing, look at, how is your credential recovery workflow done? How is your enrollment workflow? How is that done? Because this is where the attackers will leech onto. If things that the breaches, for example, from the casinos where like the help desk was misused as well. Right. So it's either some workflows being misused, a policy that is not tight enough is being misused. So often like the MFA system, strong authentication, it just does what it's supposed to do, right? It's not being breached. But, in the end, the attackers obviously need to adjust to that, because MFA is now used by so many companies and organizations worldwide. Before that was basically, if you have any strong authentication, you probably will be fine. Attackers, especially the ones that, the drive-by hackers go like, oh, strong authentication, don't worry, I have enough targets. Why should I waste my time here? But now, almost everybody has MFA, so of course they adjust, learn, and find out how to circumvent that, right? They have to. It's a business like anything else, except it's illegal, right? So they have to adjust, and they are succeeding by misusing the help desk, for example. So I'm an employee. Can you help me reset my password, or I lost my authenticator or whatever, and then suddenly they are fully authenticated, and the MFA system goes, come right in, you're authenticated.
Shells everywhere. Like that. I'm thinking about kind of takeaways for viewers today, and this is teeing this up perfectly. I think like a pet peeve again of mine is that we have these continuity exercises once a year. I don't know. Let's say you got SOC 2, you got ISO, you must do some form of IR process and BCP, but they're done, in my experience, to satisfy like kind of the obligations of, or the regulation or the compliance kind of
checkbox stuff.
The checkbox is a much better way of saying it. So like, how do we change that? You've just enumerated an attack path there. Tyler's talked about 3 or 4, but does that not require you to be technical? And is that why we're not doing them? Because like this should be something that we're doing.
You'd hope so. I mean, the lessons, I'd love for the lessons all to be learned a lot faster. You have a risk where you could look like a bit of an ambulance chaser. If you're talking to a customer, it's like, well, this company got breached and it could happen to you. And even though you're trying to give them the good advice and they don't learn it. And I remember a few years ago, Tyler, you did some incident response for a customer and I was helping them with the resolution as well. And the lessons weren't being tested. And it was very frustrating because we can help you solve this problem, this solution, but it was almost falling on deaf ears.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it wasn't raining when Noah built the ark, right? Like, you don't do that then. I thought you'd all like that. But it wasn't.
He didn't build it in the UK then.
I think, But I do feel trying to do it at that point is going to be difficult, in the same way that I do feel taking, again, it was a loaded question, very specific breach and going to a client and saying, oh, hey, they've been hosed, so you need X, Y, Z. But when you're threat modeling, like there are things that you can do, right? Like think in founder mode, Tyler, like what's your take on getting these good security principles and processes into like building?
Well, I mean, building the first iteration of our product, like authentication and authorization is like core to any security product, but especially at a startup level where we want people to get on our platform and feel comfortable. So we need to make sure that we're not going to go roll our own auth, for example. We're not, we're
takeaway number 2. Yeah, don't roll your own auth.
And so we bake that in right at the very get go. I'd love to say, oh yeah, we're gonna go all out and kind of do like full RBAC and kind of support passwordless right out of the gate, and that's unlikely. But we have to take kind of a risk approach to it, both the risk of how fast can we grow as a business and to get out to market, but also we know what the threats are, and I know what the threats are, so I need to make sure that my users are safe on the system as well.
Brilliant stuff.
But in this case, you're doing something that many actually, I wouldn't say most, but many don't do. Yeah?
I know, yeah.
They do like they look at things.
They build fast and break things.
Yeah, and it's like they don't have to do this risk analysis, like boring risk management almost, like something that should be done like 30 years ago, right? And often I see like this is not being done properly. Yeah. So you don't qualify and quantify the risk. Yeah, you don't have like different categories like high, secure, medium, and low, like 3 levels or so. Not even that is done, right? I mean, I had customers like in a financial space going, oh, everything we do is highly sensitive, and you go like, really? Like, no, it's not. Like if like the CIA and the FBI have different levels, but you say everything is the same high levels, like this is not practical, and it leads to things like being too expensive because everything is equal, so everything needs to be super highly protected. So you're spending a lot of money on something that probably you shouldn't spend the money on. Yeah.
But if you classify everything as highly top secret, then you don't have to classify anything.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you've unplugged yourself from the internet at that point.
Yeah.
I'm sort of smirking as Ingo's walking through that, because I remember an active example of a client many years ago where they told me something was highly confidential or the environment was highly confidential. I explained the requirements for WAF and load balancing in those environments, and they just turned around and said, what's the one below highly confidential? And I think we see too much of that. And again, I'm not going to hate on compliance for the sake of it, but a lot of risk management is put in place to satisfy compliance requirements. So you have these 5x5 matrices with someone who's thrown a dart at a board on where something sits, and I've seen this happen way more than it should. You'll see organizations and GRC functions like intentionally make the risk management processes onerous and complicated as possible, so that an auditor just looks and says, I don't want to
looks about right.
Peel the onion back, any layers on that. But no, I do want to spend some more time on risks. I do think it is really, really important. Like Dan, from your side of things, like how do you bring risk into any of these conversations? Because I find too many CISOs will say we take a risk-based approach. Then you have that awkward pause where you're expecting them to tell you some more about what that is, and then it's down to kind of like the vendors, the consultants to walk them through it. So
risk and compliance need to be a part of every conversation.
Yeah.
Okay. Absolutely, everything you do, you've got to measure the risk versus the benefit to the business. And often you talk to businesses, and it's very easy to say, well, we put it on the risk register, as if to say, well, it's no longer a risk to me and my business. Legacy operating systems is the one which I hear the most about. But every conversation that I try and have should always have an element of compliance in it.
Yeah.
What we're doing is a step towards better compliance or achieving ISO 27001 or something like that, because that's the value that we can give to the customer. Sure, we could sell you a $1 million firewall which bells and whistles on it, but if you've not got it configured correctly and you've not got high availability, or the RSA platform as well, if you've not got your ID Plus and your local appliances working in tandem and everything else, then you're not achieving that high availability approach that you're trying to that you've asked for.
How would you sorry, I should say it's Tyler, like from a kind of like an IR perspective, like how do you position, because obviously when you're looking at kind of like SIM deployments, when you're looking at XDR, when you're looking at all these tools, they're expensive. A lot of organizations are only kind of familiar with AV and possibly EPP. Like how would you sell from a risk perspective, like the value of getting better insight?
I mean, if you talk from an IR perspective, it's really interesting because I think there's a lot of products that are put in place to reach compliance that when you get to the point where it's in an IR mode, are not leveraged. But they were put there to help mitigate a risk or help breach compliance. Yeah. I used to say the DLP products in the space where companies would put them in place, they would check the box, but as soon as we ever went in to do an incident, never touched the product, never touched the DLP. Yeah. It was never even like used as kind of a pivot point. And so it's interesting that product was purchased to meet a risk or to mitigate a risk, and it also to be compliant. But IR is a bit unique in that sense because it's after the fact and it wasn't helpful.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think DLP is another fantastic example of you can buy various different technologies out there, but it's another one where people don't invest the time and the effort in like what data they have that's important, the roles, the people, etc.
Because it's really hard.
I'll say DLP has changed. This has changed to something quite
it's hard. It gathers so much. It's a bit like smart PCAP or PCAP rather. It gathers so much data that if you haven't got it implemented correctly, then you're not going to get the most out of the system. So it becomes yes, we've got a DLP solution, tick.
I mean, going back to the authentication piece on your question there, Chris, I mean, one of the things that I always found interesting off the back of an IR, one of the usual recommendations came down to implementing, going to an RSA and getting a kind of an authentication solution put in place. Like I would say 99% of the incidents I ever did came off the back of that. Someone was implementing either a net new authentication mechanism because they didn't have, it was kind of all fairly low level, or they were upgrading their existing one to allow them to do a little bit more tailored authentication and authorization around the network. RSA being one, and a few of the other kind of historical ones as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm desperately thinking of which of the different areas I want to cover with you today. I think we're going to have you all back to kind of cover some of these points. So thinking there about risk and compliance, we've talked a lot about passwordless. You talked there, and this is the thing I want to double click on. We talked about like the efficacy of these solutions, right? So, you buy these great solutions, but if they're not configured correctly, and that kind of brings me around to the topic of AI, right? Because, we're talking about factoids today. We're talking about views that possibly aren't correct. Like, isn't AI going to solve all of these problems with like configuration management and compliance and risk?
Yeah, next question.
Right. I feel, possibly I should start this one a bit of a way into
the same lives.
Well, Ingo, let's start with you. Like, you work for a product company,
right?
Very successful, lots and lots of customers. I'm sure you get a ton of pressure to implement AI in the solutions. This is an interesting one. Like all the solutions you have. So how do you do it to add value over just being
It's just a sticker on the box.
Yeah,
right?
I think
AI powered.
So if you go through like trade shows, security trade shows, it seems like that's where the pressure actually is, because everybody has some AI somewhere,
investors, trade shows.
Yeah, investors. So that's but on customers, I think it's a bit different, to be honest.
Okay.
Right. So of course, they see that AI is everywhere now, so it's like, okay, what are you doing with AI? Yeah? But we had, for example, some AI in our products for years and years and years, right? Way before like the AI hype went off. And at that time, it was really exotic. Yeah, so people are like, "Oh, this is AI." It's like, like magic. There'll be dragons, right?
Yeah.
So you actually had to do a lot of explanation. Like, oh, hold on, this is how we do it. Like we like in the authentication solution, we use machine learning, which is deterministic. It's not like dragons and unicorns. Yeah. So it's like exactly what actually happens. Like if you have certain input, and exactly what will happen in the output. Yeah. And exactly what happens in between. Yeah. So and you explain that. Yeah. So and then of course the customers will go like, this is great, it works, and they have it now for years, saying this is exactly what what it's supposed to do. It does fantastically, but then you have the other approach where you go like we have AI, so I would say I won't name anybody here, but they just stick AI on something, and especially in the security space, it's like, hold on. Which type of AI? What is it doing? How is it working? Right? Because AI is not AI. It's like there are different types, and especially in security, you want to know kind of how it works, right? Yeah. You want to know how, right? I have a certain input, and how does it get to the output, and can I trust the output? Especially in security, you want to know that this output, the result that you then rely your other decisions on, that this is reliable.
So you do, Ingo, and I was smiling because, like, as security practitioners, I think a lot of people want to know that, like, they have the fidelity, right? They understand, like, that information that's coming out, it's high fidelity, the veracity is there. But you also said, they want to know what type of AI it is, right? I challenge that. I'm really alarmed by the lack of decomposition, even in our own industry of that. Like, I don't know, it's probably to you, Dan, like, when you're talking with clients, when you're out in the industry talking to CISOs, like, what is that due diligence for AI? Like, what process are clients going through to qualify things?
Maybe I might be a little bit skeptical with it.
Okay.
I would put.
I'm the worst person sitting on this couch.
No,
I'm coming to
I get probably 2-3 invitations per week from new vendors with the latest and greatest product. It's going to change the world, AI powered. And I used to go and attend all of them. I used to watch them, and then you sort of build up this another AI product, and they're just. It's, as Ingo was saying, it's just a moniker, a sticker on a box, just to say we've built in this here because everyone else has done it. We need to do it as well. Customers, where customers tend to ask about it is around intelligence in data. Data's being gathered. I could be an SQL genius and I could pull out data queries, but with the proliferance of something like Copilot now, what if I could plug these two systems together? And I could ask it a question, where are my threats? Where's my weakest link? And that is absolutely a fantastic topic that comes up.
It is. I just feel, and I will pivot to you on this, Tyler, but just real quick, like, it's the assurance and the supply chain side of it that I find fascinating, right? So anecdote, I won't mention the specifics of whom, but like, I've worked with various different kind of like clients and gone out and queried CISOs around, hey, so-and-so is thinking of bringing AI into their product to do XYZ, right? What do you need to see in terms of testing? Because people love the term pen test. We'll pen test this, we'll pen test that. Really pen test an AI solution. So I was quite surprised going out and talking to these CISOs that the adoption has gone like this, but the governance and the understanding of like how, so you mentioned a great one, Ingo, of saying the information out and qualifying that, but like Tyler, you've worked on a lot of cases and stuff, like how do you test for AI not doing bad stuff and taking over the world?
Yeah, I mean, it's also a pretty core component to what I'm building at this stage. So it's interesting. I think the perspective here on the couch is pretty common in security. Of like, as soon as I say, hey, I've got an AI security product, it's just like, let me roll my eyes. But there's AI's been in the security domain for years. But going to your question, like, every time I use a different piece of technology, whether it be a new model or it be a new methodology, I need to look at how is that interacting with the data within the back end of my network. How can I, as an attacker, kind of take over, do something malicious? I mean, there's lots of things around, not to say like prompt engineering is going to be the only thing that secures you, but for example, if you're exposing an LLM, there's different tests that you can go through to validate, hey, have I secured it? But every tool that leverages quote AI is going to have a different threat model and potential entry point that you're going to have to assess almost as like an individual application. And so like I go through that daily. Every time I kind of make a tweak or change or add another piece to the puzzle, I have to go through and figure out like, hey, if I'm an attacker, how could I kind of take this on? And it's some days it's like I wish I could turn that part of my brain off and be like, all right, forget that attackers do this, and I'll just build the app and kind of get on with it.
That makes sense. I do feel, and I do agree with your point. Like, it does seem that everything is AI driven and kind of perpetuates like the industry now feels. And I mentioned investors, but I do feel that like venture is partly to blame. Like, do you know what I mean? Everything has to be seen to be innovative.
Yes, and it's also almost, again, looking at trade shows there. Seems like if you don't do anything with AI, you're not getting investors, let alone customers, but like, investors. I mean, so there's a lot of riding on this hype wave, And if you take a couple of steps back and look at like what AI is good at is what you said, is like going through massive amounts of data. So it's really useful, for example, in the identity space, in a governance environment, for example, identity governance, to bubble up those this really interesting information to the surface. So you can actually look at it and then maybe you make the decision, but AI helps you to actually find those interesting bits and pieces, right? Now, so this is, I think, step one is like, getting the visibility. Now, yes, you could also think that AI actually makes a decision then for you and does it automatically, right? And I feel like, we probably end up there eventually as an industry, but I think at the moment, this having visibility and helping with this mass amount of data that, everybody has, that's a huge benefit of AI on its own, right?
Yeah, I agree.
So going directly into, hey, now let AI automatically change firewall policies and whatnot. That's like, I probably wouldn't have confidence into that right now. Let's talk again in a couple of years.
Is it a little bit like the passwordless thing? It's great until it isn't great. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, it's so much. Also, if you think about like which type of AI using an LLM, for example, Copilot got mentioned. It's like, actually, you're sharing data, sensitive data from a company with an outside entity, anyone. It doesn't have to be Copilot, can be something else. Is that actually okay? How's that process then in the cloud with this AI? Do they segregate that per tenant, or is that like going into a common pool? That is and you don't know that, and there might be regulations that you're violating right now, like GDPR, for example, or just like good old data privacy, where I think like this data that this AI is looking at, that shouldn't go anywhere. Right?
Yeah, Tyler's got.
It's interesting the like, hey, implementing a firewall change. Like there's a lot of like, we have computer use coming out now, which I find really interesting. The kind of leveraging, but authenticating those tools, like what access are you giving those tools, and it just screams in the back of my head of someone instituting the model where the AI can start quarantining assets and start taking down full networks. And I'm not saying this like, hey, Skynet's coming and whatnot, but it's more, it inadvertently could cause harm by making a change that it shouldn't. And if you're giving those tools, those functions that it's calling the wrong level of access, then it may be able to do things that it wasn't intended to do. But because it has that ability to make those calls, it can.
Absolutely.
And so hopefully those that are building these SOC Copilot-esque tools are thinking about that as they're going through this.
I agree. I mean, we could talk AI all day, and I did want, if we had more time, I really wanted to kind of deep dive into like those third-party risk management processes and how you find out where across your supply chain AI is being used. I think that's super, super difficult. But to close out like the AI conversation, like Dan, are you finding like clients you've got out there who are just not allowing access to frontier models at all? They're not allowing access to ChatGPT. Like, are we past that phase? Is everyone out there now allowing a something?
I would say that it's almost like the horse has bolted. Right. Yeah. Microsoft has now implemented or integrated it into the Office suite, for example.
Great point.
The icon on your start bar or your taskbar, whatever it's called, or Windows, it's right there. There are still concerns. I know you can control it. I think Ingo's hit the nail on the head with saying about data share, and the fact that people maybe, or employees maybe pasting something into ChatGPT Copilot, thinking, it just gets processed and returned back to me, but it's not. That data is also being used by the vendor to help the models learn. Okay, and there is that data leak, the component. Tyler mentioned DLP earlier. The world has just introduced a whole new vector of DLP.
No, you're absolutely right. Well, look, this has been great today. So I'd like to thank you all for coming along. So Dan,
thank you,
Tyler. You don't get off that easy. You can't walk away yet. So we're going to finish with industry trends. No, we're not going to finish with industry trends. What I want each of you to do is just give me. I don't actually have a wand here. I was going to bring a magic wand. But you've got a magic wand. You can change one thing. It can be about people, process, or technology. And there's an extra point. There's a bottle of beer over there. If you can have identity as part of this, given the theme of today, we're lucky to have RSA here. So what would you change? You have a couple of seconds to think about it, but I'm sure you've all got a passionate view on that. You better have, anyway.
I'll have a go first. So look, the users are fast becoming a identity as a weakest link. Okay, there are lots of solutions out there, PAM, IGA, and all of that. What I would love is for vendors to agree on certain standards where you can now integrate these tools into everything. We covered a little bit with passwordless. Wouldn't it be great if we could have this sort of unified identity platform where I no longer have to have different systems configured. I don't have to integrate with Azure and Okta and Duo. It just works. Yeah, okay. Because that simplification of the whole process would pay back dividends in terms of improving security.
Yeah. Brilliant stuff. So.
And I used the word identity. So
you did, yeah. There's 2.5 points.
Okay.
Come on, what's your view?
All right. So you waved the magic wand at the vendors, yeah. So let me wave the magic stuff at the customers, right?
Nice.
What I would like that everybody has a solid risk management, right? Because that tells them, these are the hotspots I need to take care of. Yeah. These are the ones these are ones that I can probably ignore, right? Because that drives then what they should do. And this also can be used, this information, by the technology backend, by the technical controls, to have a different configuration, different behavior depending on the user risk, right?
Sure.
In identity, so here's the identity
tenuous
bit. So there's and to be honest, it's not only identity, but many products, right? They have so many great controls and features that you can switch on and take advantage of to make things easy to administer, easy for the users, or more secure, efficient, but it doesn't work if you cannot have any basis on the risk, right? So if they would have that, it would actually enable them to do a lot more efficient, and I think it would actually save them money in the end.
I think you're right. You two aren't asking for much, by the way.
It's some basic stuff. We're basically asking for stuff that should be there already, right? But it's not. That's the problem.
It's not. No. Tyler, anything?
I mean, I'll add on to Dan's point. I really wish there was more of a move away from this SSO tax approach.
Yes, that's a good one.
Especially as a builder of products relying on different technologies. But given Dan kind of already alluded to that, mine is probably more focused on using the last couple of years of migrating from password authentication to say now passwordless, using that as learnings. I hope organizations use this time now until we didn't cover it, but now until Q Day, when quantum appears, as a learning exercise of how quickly are you going to have to pivot to a new authentication mechanism, because that's going to open a whole new can of worms.
I agree. I'm just going to say I think Tyler wins. There's two reasons, right? I think number one is probably the most likely, and number two, if I think about visceral impact, we'll have viewers out there when he mentions SSO tax going, oh yeah, me too. So, but anyway, gentlemen,
buzzword bingo. I think that was.
Guys, this was great. It's given me a ton of ideas for us to catch up again.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming today. And for all our viewers today, I'd like to thank you all for joining the Armadillo security sessions with RSA. Catch us again soon.